"Sit down, Maid's boy," Conrad Vale snarled. "This is open court, not your mother's kitchen." The words struck the 12th floor courtroom harder than the gavel had. Micah Bell stood halfway up from the public bench with a blue file folder under one arm and a medical note in his hand. His white shirt had been washed so many times the collar had softened. His shoes were clean, cheap, and wet from the morning rain. At his wrist, a steel paperclip shaped like a crane held together 3 old pages his father had once saved from a maintenance locker. His mother, Elaine Bell, sat at the plaintiff table even though she was the defendant. That was how billionaire money arranged rooms. Conrad Vale sat across from her in a charcoal suit, silver hair brushed back, jaw lifted toward the judge as if the court had been built to frame him. He had called this a simple civil claim, a housing advance, a household repayment dispute, a maid who had accepted generosity and then forgotten gratitude. But Micah had spent 2 years digitizing court records and 6 months inside the state workplace safety archive. He knew when a small case carried a heavy shadow. He knew the docket was missing a number, VDM-47B, furnace vent suppression record. Judge Helena Price looked over her glasses. "Mr. Vale," she said, "you will not address members of the gallery that way." Conrad smiled without apology. "Your Honor, I apologize to the court, but this family has confused my patience with invitation." Elaine's hand trembled on the table. She did not look at her son. That was her way of begging him not to make things worse. Micah lowered the medical note. Conrad's lawyer, Martin Kells, rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the Bell family has already attempted to inject irrelevant workplace allegations into a narrow household matter. We ask that the court proceed to settlement approval and sanction further interference." Micah looked at the docket sheet on the clerk's table. Bates range, VDM-46F, VDM-48A. Nothing between. Mara Ellison, the court clerk, saw him see it. Her hand froze above the exhibit stamp. Micah could have shouted the file name then. He could have held up the scan receipt. He could have told the room that Conrad Vale had just signed an affidavit swearing no workplace safety matter, retaliation event, or witness pressure file connected to Elaine Bell existed, while a misindexed state record proved the opposite. He did not. Not yet. Because if he opened the file without the court's timestamp, Conrad would call it stolen. Because his mother could lose the housing bridge that paid for her blood pressure medication. Because anger alone was not enough to protect the workers whose names were buried in that file. His father's voice came back to him, rough from factory dust. "Do not open a file until it can protect more than your anger." Micah sat down. Conrad looked satisfied. That was his mistake. In the next 40 minutes, one file would move from a missing number to an admitted exhibit, from a buried safety record to a lender default, from a Maid son's blue folder to the document that took Vale Dominion Manufacturing out of Conrad Vale's hands. But first, the billionaire had to put his lie on the record. Kingsport Civil Court had a way of making everyone smaller. The ceilings were high, but stained at the corners. The wooden benches carried scratches from decades of keys, rings, and anxious fingers. The fluorescent lights hummed over old brass fixtures that had once been beautiful. Rain ran down the narrow windows and made the city outside look like it had been erased and redrawn in gray. Micah had loved that building since he was 16. Not because it was fair. He knew better. He loved it because records lived there. Real records. Ugly records. Receipts, motions, exhibits, names, denials, corrections. A courthouse could be bribed by power, delayed by money, and confused by procedure, but paper still left tracks if someone cared enough to follow them. Micah cared. He learned care from his father, Daniel Bell, a maintenance worker at Vale Dominion Manufacturing. Daniel fixed conveyors, furnace vents, overhead doors, and the old boiler that should have been replaced years before management turned it into a line item called deferred modernization. He came home with steel dust in his eyebrows and a quiet way of washing his hands twice before touching anything in the kitchen. Daniel carried a handful of shaped paper clips in his lunchbox. Stars, hooks, cranes, odd little things he bent from scrap wire during breaks. He used them to hold safety notes together. "Files get lazy if you let them spread," he told Micah. "Clip the truth before somebody separates it." The steel crane was the last one. Daniel gave it to Micah 3 months before the cough became blood and the blood became hospital corridors. Vale Dominion called his illness unrelated to workplace exposure. The family doctor disagreed. A nurse whispered about other furnace workers. Elaine asked questions in the wrong household and was told to be grateful for steady work. Conrad Vale owned the factory. He also owned the penthouse where Elaine cleaned 14 years of floors, glass, silver, and silence. At Vale Tower, Elaine knew which guest drank too much, which lawyer arrived after midnight, which assistant cried in the pantry, and which closet had been cleared for a shred bin after a furnace incident. She was not supposed to understand the meetings, but she understood tone. She understood the difference between inconvenience and fear. After Daniel died, she heard Conrad in his study say, "Keep the vent issue out of refinancing. Household exposure is manageable." She did not know what household exposure meant. Micah would learn. At 21, he worked mornings as a court records digitization clerk and evenings at Kingsport Community College. Before that, he had interned at the State Workplace Safety Archive, where forgotten boxes arrived with labels written by people who hoped no one would ever need them. He loved metadata more than people expected a Maid son to love anything. Intake dates, seal status, cross-references, Bates ranges, retention tags, misindex logs, file names with one digit wrong, the quiet ways powerful people tried to bury facts without destroying them outright. VDM-47B came to him on a Thursday afternoon in a gray archive carton labeled agricultural equipment, miscellaneous. Vale Dominion did not make agricultural equipment. Micah noticed because the attached scan slip included a factory code, VDM. Inside, he found a folder with a burned edge and a title printed in faded blue ink. Furnace Vent Suppression Record, Incident Series, 47B, Facility, Vale Dominion Manufacturing, Containment Review, Internal. He was not allowed to remove original materials. He did not. He scanned, he logged, he flagged. The file described a furnace ventilation failure 3 years before Daniel Bell died. It included maintenance reports, worker complaints, air quality readings, a memo advising executive containment, and a note tying witness pressure to household service contacts. Household service contacts. Micah had stared at that phrase until the letters blurred. His mother's name appeared in a routing note. Ebell may have overheard containment strategy at private residence. Treat housing benefit as leverage if disclosure risk increases. He printed only the public index receipt. The file itself was archived under state custody. He followed chain of custody because the truth had already been mishandled enough. Then, 2 months later, Conrad Vale sued Elaine Bell. The complaint was ridiculous on its face. Conrad claimed Elaine owed repayment of a housing advance used after Daniel's illness, plus penalties for breach of household confidentiality. The amount was not large to a billionaire. It was crushing to Elaine. The proposed settlement offered to forgive the debt if she signed a broad release stating she had no knowledge of any workplace, safety, employment, or retaliation matter involving Vale Dominion or Conrad Vale. That was not a housing case. It was a padlock. Micah tried to get a lawyer. Legal aid was full. A clinic helped Elaine draft a response but could not attend the hearing. Conrad arrived with 3 lawyers, a public relations associate, and a local business reporter who had been told the case showed Vale's patience with former household staff. Micah arrived with a blue folder. The morning of the hearing, Elaine sat at their kitchen table twisting a napkin into a rope. "Do not say anything unless the judge asks," she said. "I know. You think you know? Then they call you boy, and your mouth becomes older than your plan." Micah looked at her. "Did he call Dad that?" She folded the napkin flat. "Not to his face." That answer was worse. She touched the steel crane clip on his folder. "Your father made that one during a double shift." "I know. He said it looked like a bird trying not to fly away." Micah smiled faintly. "That sounds like Dad. He also said files are like people. If you put them in the wrong place, someone will later claim they never existed." Micah closed the folder. "I'm not going to open it too early." Elaine studied him. "You promise?" "I promise I will open it when it can protect more than my anger." Her eyes filled, but she did not let tears fall. "Then let's go be insulted by a rich man." The courtroom was already crowded when they arrived. Conrad wanted it crowded. The case was listed as Vale versus Bell, civil recovery, but 3 reporters sat in the back. Vale Dominion's general counsel sat behind Conrad. A refinancing banker stood near the wall, pretending to check email. Two former factory workers came in quietly and took seats near the exit. One carried an inhaler in his coat pocket. Mara Ellison watched all of them from the clerk's desk. She had worked in that courtroom for 31 years. She knew who came to be heard and who came to be seen. Conrad Vale came to be seen winning. Elaine Bell came in like someone trying not to take up too much air. Micah came in carrying a folder like it had weight beyond paper. Mara noticed the steel crane clip. She noticed because she noticed small objects. A lucky pen. A wedding ring turned inward. A folded eviction notice. Small objects told her which part of the case paperwork had failed to hold. Years earlier, in another courtroom, Mara had noticed a missing injury file in a worker claim against a shipping company. The lawyer for the company called it collateral. The clerk supervisor said not to delay the docket. Mara let the case move. Later, she learned the worker had settled for almost nothing because the missing file contained inspection photos. She had told herself clerks were not advocates. That sentence had kept her pension safe and her sleep thin. Now, as Conrad's lawyer placed exhibits on the table, Mara saw something familiar. Bates range jump, VDM-46F, VDM-48A, no 47B. She looked at Micah. He was looking at the same gap. The hearing began at 9:06 a.m. Martin Kells stood first. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. Ms. Bell accepted a housing advance after years of generous household employment. She later breached confidentiality obligations by encouraging her family to circulate unfounded workplace conspiracy theories. Mr. Vale has offered a settlement that forgives repayment in exchange for ordinary release language. Judge Price looked at Elaine. Ms. Bell, are you represented today? Elaine stood. No, Your Honor. Legal aid helped me review some papers, but they couldn't come. Conrad's mouth moved in a small smile. The judge saw it. Mr. Kells, I will not rush an unrepresented party through a broad release. Of course, Your Honor, but the release is limited. Micah opened the blue folder. Kells continued. It concerns household matters only. Micah saw the draft release on the projector. Household matters, employment matters, safety matters, witness statements, workplace allegations, illness claims, and all related known or unknown disclosures. Mara saw Micah's hand tighten. Judge Price said, This is broader than household matters. Kells smiled. That language is standard belt and suspenders drafting. Conrad leaned toward his lawyer and muttered, not quietly enough, Do not let them turn this into the factory. Micah heard it. Mara heard it. The court reporter's fingers kept moving. At 9:18, Micah stood to hand his mother the medical note she had forgotten to give the judge. It documented her blood pressure and medication schedule, relevant because the proposed payment terms would cut off her health stipend. That was when Conrad snarled, Sit down, Maid's boy. This is open court, not your mother's kitchen. The words did several things at once. They exposed him. They humiliated Elaine. They gave the reporters a line. They invited Micah to lose control. Micah sat. Conrad thought he had won a small dominance. Instead, he had created a transcript. Judge Price warned him. Kells apologized for heated phrasing. Elaine stared at the table. Micah looked at the blue folder and waited. At 9:24, Kells introduced Conrad's affidavit. No workplace safety matter, retaliation event, or witness pressure file is connected to this household dispute. Conrad signed it in open court with a black pen. The stroke was clean. The lie was now dated, timed, witnessed, and entered. Mara took the affidavit and stamped it. Her stamp landed harder than usual. Micah watched the ink dry. At 9:26, he raised his hand. Your Honor, may I point out a docket anomaly? Kells sighed. Here we go. Judge Price looked at Micah. Identify yourself. Micah Bell, Elaine Bell's son. You are not counsel. I understand. I work as a records digitization clerk for the court system and formerly interned at the State Workplace Safety Archive. I am asking the clerk to check a missing Bates range before the court relies on the affidavit. Kells stood immediately. Objection! This is exactly the family interference we warned about. Conrad turned in his chair. Your Honor, this young man has been poking around stolen company materials. Micah kept his eyes on the judge. I have no stolen company materials. Kells said. Then he has nothing. Micah said. If VDM-47B is collateral, why does the Bates range jump from 46F to 48A? The courtroom changed. Not visibly to everyone, but Mara felt it. Judge Price felt it. Kells felt it most of all. Conrad's face did not move, which was how Micah knew the number meant something. Mara said softly, There is an index gap. Kells turned to her. Ms. Ellison, please stay in your clerical lane. The air went cold. Judge Price looked at Kells. Counsel. Kells adjusted his tie. My apologies, Your Honor, but the clerk's administrative note is not evidence. Mara's hand hovered over the keyboard. That was her first chance. She could open the scan log. She could request a docket correction. She could make the missing number visible. Or she could do what she had done years ago and tell herself, clerks are neutral until neutrality becomes a shovel. Judge Price said, We will take a 15-minute recess. I want the parties to address the scope of the release and the affidavit. Conrad leaned toward Micah as everyone stood. You bring one stolen file into this room, he said, and I will have you referred before lunch. Micah did not answer. Elaine whispered, Micah, I know. No, you don't. He can hurt you. He already has. He can hurt you more. Micah looked at his mother then. I need the timestamp. She understood just enough to be afraid in a new direction. The courtroom emptied into the hallway. Kells pulled Elaine toward a settlement room. Ms. Bell, this is your chance to end this before your son creates criminal exposure. Micah stepped forward. Mara, from the clerk's desk, said, Mr. Bell. He stopped. She looked at him once, then down at the docket terminal. Do not open anything in the hallway. He nodded. That was not a warning. It was help. In the hallway, rain tapped the courthouse windows. Reporters whispered near the elevator. Conrad stood with his general counsel and the refinancing banker. Elaine was guided into a settlement room by Kells and a woman from Vail Legal. A sheriff's deputy stood nearby, uncertain whether this was a civil hearing or the edge of something else. Micah walked to the far end of the corridor, near the old payphone alcove where the Wi-Fi was weak and the walls were thick. He took out the scan receipt from his blue folder, State Workplace Safety Archive, Public Intake Correction Receipt, VDM-47B, Misindex Review Pending. At the bottom was a phone number, Records Integrity Desk. He called. A woman answered on the second ring. State Workplace Records Integrity. My name is Micah Bell, former archive intern, Misindex File VDM-47B, Kingsport Civil Court, Courtroom 12. Conrad Vail just signed an affidavit saying no workplace safety or witness pressure file connects to Elaine Bell. Preserve docket, scan logs, counsel statements, projector requests, and exhibit chain. Are you in possession of original state materials? No. Only a public scan receipt and reference copy of the index page. Has the file been offered? Not yet. I need authentication before they call it stolen. Good. Stay with chain. What is the risk? Settlement release being used to bury witness pressure. My mother is in the settlement room. Vail counsel is threatening criminal referral. Do not confront alone. We are contacting court clerk and judicial chambers. Do you request safety hold? Micah looked toward the settlement room. Yes, but do not punish the workers. Do not turn my mother into the story. Put the file where it belongs. Understood. He hung up. Back inside courtroom 12, Mara Ellison had not taken recess. She sat at her terminal and opened the exhibit index. VDM-46F, VDM-48A. She searched 47B, no court entry. She searched State Archive cross-reference. Restricted? No. Sealed? No. Misindexed? Yes. Public correction pending. Her heart began to beat harder. A message popped up from the courtroom technology officer. Projector requested off for post-recess. Vail counsel says privacy issue. Mara saved it. Then a text from Kells paralegal arrived on the exhibit coordination thread by mistake or arrogance. Keep 47B out of open session. Judge does not need factory collateral. Mara stared at the words. Her supervisor appeared at the side door. Mara, counsel says you were commenting on evidence. I noted an index gap. Do not make yourself part of the case. Years ago, that sentence had worked. Today, it sounded like a file cabinet closing on a hand. Mara printed the scan log. She opened an emergency docket correction form. Her supervisor hissed, "Mara!" Mara stamped the form with the current time. "Now I am part of the record," she said. In Settlement Room B, Elaine Bell sat across from Kells, Vale's general counsel, and a release she was not meant to understand. Kells softened his voice. "Ms. Bell, your son is putting himself in danger. Mr. Vale does not want that." Elaine looked at the paper. He called him Maid's boy. Kells exhaled as if she were wasting time. An unfortunate phrase. This release prevents further escalation. It says, "I agree there is no safety matter," because there is none connected to this case. Then why is it in the release? Vale's general counsel leaned forward. "Ms. Bell, your housing benefit, medical bridge, and repayment forgiveness are all available today. If this hearing becomes a factory inquiry, those accommodations disappear." Elaine's hands folded. There it was, the kindness with a rope inside it. She thought of Daniel coughing at their kitchen table. She thought of Micah reading old records by lamplight. She thought of Conrad saying her family had lived off his patience. "No," she said. Kells blinked. "No, I will not sign." The general counsel said, "Then Mr. Vale will pursue full recovery." Elaine stood. "Then he can pursue it where the file can see him." At 9:44, courtroom 12 reconvened. Conrad returned smiling. Elaine did not. Kells looked irritated. Micah returned to the gallery with the blue folder closed. Mara sat at the clerk's desk with a printed scan log under her palm. Judge Price entered with a sealed note from Chambers and a face that told every lawyer in the room to stop enjoying procedure. "Be seated." The room sat. Judge Price looked at Mara. "Ms. Ellison, I have received a communication from State Workplace Records Integrity regarding an emergency misindex correction. Do we have a docket anomaly?" Mara stood. "Yes, Your Honor. File VDM-47B is absent from the Bates sequence in materials referenced by the Vale affidavit. State Archive log identifies it as a public misindexed workplace safety file. It is not sealed." Kells shot up. "Your Honor, we object to the clerk becoming a witness." Judge Price said, "Sit down, Mr. Kells. The clerk is reporting docket status." Kells remained standing for one dangerous second, then sat. Judge Price turned to Micah. "Mr. Bell, did you remove any original materials from Vale Dominion or the State Archive?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you possess only a public reference receipt?" "Yes." "Bring it forward." Micah rose. Conrad leaned back, eyes narrow. "Careful, boy." This time the judge struck the bench with her gavel. "Mr. Vale, one more word directed at him and I will hold you in contempt." Micah walked to the clerk's table. The blue folder felt heavier than wood. He placed the steel crane clip on top before opening it. The small metal bird caught the fluorescent light. Judge Price noticed. So did Elaine. Micah took out the receipt and the archive reference page. "Your Honor," he said, "who removed VDM-47B from the Bates range before Mr. Vale swore it did not exist?" The courtroom held the question. Not because a son asked it, because the record could answer. Judge Price ordered the file authenticated through State Workplace Records Integrity. The call came through the courtroom speaker 10 minutes later. The voice identified herself as Leora Chen, State Records Officer. File VDM-47B is a public workplace safety record misindexed under Agricultural Equipment Miscellaneous due to incorrect intake coding. It is not sealed. It is not proprietary. It includes Vale Dominion Manufacturing, furnace ventilation failure records, internal containment memoranda, worker illness classification notes, and a household witness leverage reference. Conrad's lawyer stood. "We object to reading contents before admissibility." Judge Price replied, "You introduced an affidavit denying the connection. You opened the door." Conrad muttered, "This court has no jurisdiction over my company." Judge Price looked at him. "You brought the affidavit into my record." The speaker continued. Leora Chen authenticated the scan dates, file hash, intake trail, and the misindex flag. Mara submitted the docket gap and scan log. The court reporter produced the transcript of Conrad's Maid's boy insult and his counsel's statements. The technology officer confirmed a projector shutdown request from Vale's team after the anomaly was raised. Then Mara turned over the exhibit coordination text. Keep 47B out of open session. Kells claimed privilege. Judge Price said it was sent to court exhibit coordination. That ended that. Then the file came onto the projector. Furnace Vent Suppression Record VDM-47B. Executive Containment Review. The room did not gasp. People think revelations make noise. Usually, they make reading. The first page documented blocked ventilation in furnace line 3. The second contained worker complaints about metallic taste, coughing, headaches, and ash buildup. The third showed a maintenance recommendation that production stop until full vent replacement. The fourth carried Conrad Vale's initials beside a handwritten note. Delay public remediation until refinancing closes. Avoid creating worker illness cluster. Micah felt his father's name before he saw it. Daniel Bell appeared on page 7. Maintenance staff reported repeated vent alarms. Bell advised shutdown. Supervisor instructed reset. Elaine made a sound so small only Micah heard it. He did not turn around. If he did, he might lose the thread. Page 12 contained the household reference. E. Bell may have overheard private containment discussion. Consider housing advance leverage and confidentiality release if disclosure risk increases. Judge Price read that line twice. Then she looked at Conrad. Mr. Vale, you signed an affidavit less than an hour ago stating no workplace safety matter, retaliation event, or witness pressure file connected to this household dispute exists. Conrad's face was pale now, but his voice kept its iron. I relied on counsel. Leora Chen spoke from the speaker. State Archive metadata shows Vale Dominion General Counsel requested status inquiry on VDM-47B 3 weeks ago after misindex correction began, Mara added. The court coordination text shows counsel attempted to keep 47B out of open session after the docket anomaly was raised. Kells said, Your Honor, we need a closed hearing. A man in the gallery stood suddenly. Judge Price said, Sir, sit down. The man held up an inhaler. My brother's name is in that file. The deputy moved toward him. The man lowered the inhaler but did not sit. He worked Furnace 3. He died before they called it anything. Judge Price looked at him for a long moment. Give your name to the deputy. You will not disrupt this proceeding. He nodded and sat, shaking. The courtroom had shifted from civil recovery to something with lungs. Conrad sensed it and tried to reclaim shape. Your Honor, these tragic factory matters have nothing to do with Ms. Bell's debt. Elaine stood before anyone could stop her. He sued me to make me sign that they did not exist. The sentence was plain. That made it devastating. Judge Price looked at the release. She read the broad language again. Then she turned to Kells. This was presented as a household settlement. It contains workplace release language. The affidavit denying connection is contradicted by a state file, docket materials, and counsel communications. Kells said nothing useful. At 10:31, the first external consequence arrived. The refinancing banker who had been standing by the wall left the courtroom whispering into his phone. At 10:34, Vale Dominion's lender counsel filed an emergency notice in a connected commercial docket. VDM-47B triggered a default review under safety disclosure covenants. At 10:39, a government contract compliance officer entered through the back doors with a state investigator. Vale Dominion had a pending defense supply contract. Suppressed furnace safety records and worker illness misclassification were not minor. At 10:46, Judge Price dismissed Conrad's household claim with sanctions pending further order, entered a protective order for Elaine Bell against retaliation, and referred the affidavit to appropriate authorities for review. She did not dissolve Vale Dominion from the bench. That was not her role, but one file had moved, and once it moved, every agreement built on its absence began to crack. By noon, Vale Dominion Manufacturing was under lender default review, government contract compliance hold, and state workplace safety reopening order. By mid-afternoon, the board announced Conrad Vale was suspended from operational control pending investigation, not because the board had discovered courage. Because lenders hate undisclosed safety liabilities, government contracts hate false certifications, and boards hate billionaires who put lies in open court where anyone can download them. Conrad sat very still as the news reached his phone. Micah watched him read it. There are moments when powerful men do not look ruined. They look offended that gravity applied. Conrad turned toward Micah. You think you took down a company? Micah shook his head. The file did not take your company down. The suppression did. Elaine closed her eyes. That sentence belonged partly to Daniel. At 12:12 p.m., Judge Price ended the hearing. Ms. Bell, she said, you are protected from contact by Mr. Vale or agents regarding settlement, housing, or medical benefit retaliation until further order. The court will appoint limited counsel for post-hearing matters. Elaine nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bell, the judge said. Micah stood. You were right to preserve chain of custody. He nodded once because anything more would have broken something in his chest. Mara Ellison approached after the judge left the bench. She held out a copy of the scan log. The original goes to the state investigator. This is for your file. Micah took it. Thank you. She looked at the steel crane clip. I should have opened a file years ago. Micah knew what that meant without knowing the story. Today, you kept this one open. Mara's eyes reddened. I do not know if that is enough. It is not. She nodded. But it counts. Yes. Elaine came to stand beside Micah. For a moment, mother and son looked at the empty bench where Conrad had been sitting. His lawyers surrounded him now near the side door, trying to move him away from reporters without making it look like escape. Elaine did not hug Micah in the courtroom. She had no interest in giving cameras a mother's tears so they could crop out the affidavit. Instead, she said, "Get the order copy." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." They collected every paper. Protective order, dismissal note, referral notice, scan log copy, court transcript request form. Micah clipped them with the steel crane until the folder held. Outside the courthouse, the rain had softened to a mist. Reporters waited on the steps. So did two former factory workers. One held the inhaler. The other held a photo of a man in a Vale Dominion hard hat. Elaine stopped. Micah said, "We can go around?" "No." She walked down the front steps. Not the side exit, not the service corridor, not the back stair used by people who have been told to make less scene. A reporter called, "Mrs. Bell, do you feel vindicated?" Elaine looked at her. "No." The reporter blinked. "Then how do you feel?" Elaine held up the protective order. "Not finished." That was the only quote she gave. The weeks after the hearing were louder than the hearing itself. Vale Dominion's stock of private contracts froze under review. The lender group demanded a full safety disclosure restatement. Government contract compliance placed all pending awards on hold. The board tried to call Conrad's suspension temporary until a second memo surfaced, then a third. State workplace investigators reopened misclassified claims from Furnace Line 3. Workers who had been told their coughs came from smoking, allergies, bad luck, or age were asked for statements again. Some people celebrated online. Others called it an attack on a job creator. Economists discussed local payroll exposure. Politicians discovered concern in whichever direction suited them by lunch. Micah did not watch much. He spent his days helping legal aid organize worker packets and his nights finishing classes. He still worked digitization, though not on Vale materials. The court reassigned him away from related files to protect integrity, which he respected even though it annoyed him. Elaine's housing bridge was secured under court order. Her medical benefits continued during the retaliation review. She did not return to Vale Tower. The first morning she did not go. She woke at 5:30 anyway and ironed nothing for 40 minutes. Micah found her standing in the kitchen. "You okay?" "No." "Do you want tea?" "Yes." He made tea. She sat. "I spent 14 years knowing which glass he liked for water," she said. "This morning I realized I do not have to know." "Good." "It feels strange." "Still good." She laughed softly. "Your father would say freedom has bad scheduling." Micah smiled. "He would." Elaine looked at the blue folder on the table. "You kept your promise." "Almost didn't." "When?" "When he called me that." Her face hardened. "I almost stood." "I know." You shook your head. "I needed him to sign." She touched his hand. "Your father would be proud." Micah looked away. "He should be here." "Yes." The truth sat with them. Not fixed, not softened, just allowed. Mara Ellison did not retire quietly. 3 months before her pension date, she proposed an emergency misindex review protocol for civil dockets involving corporate affidavits and public safety archives. Her supervisor called it ambitious. Judge Price called it overdue. The State Records Office adopted a pilot program. Missing Bates ranges in safety-linked cases triggered automatic cross-reference checks. Projector shutdown requests after exhibit anomalies had to be logged. Clerks could file administrative docket corrections without being accused of advocacy. At her first training session, Mara stood before 30 clerks with her hands shaking. "I used to say we are not advocates," she told them. "That is true. We are not advocates for parties, but we are advocates for the record. If the numbering jumps and we do not ask why, the silence advocates for someone." A clerk in the front row asked, "What if counsel says stay in your lane?" Mara looked at the screen behind her, where VDM-46F and VDM-48A sat with a blank space between them. "Then make sure your lane reaches the docket." Micah heard that line later and wrote it down. State Workplace Archive changed too. The VDM-47B misindex became a training case, not because the archive wanted shame. Because shame can be useful if turned into procedure before it rots into defensiveness. Intake labels were checked against facility codes. Misindexed industrial records received public correction flags faster. Household witness references were routed to a special review desk because VDM-47B taught them that worker pressure did not always happen at the factory gate. Sometimes it happened in kitchens, penthouses, service elevators, and civil court settlement rooms. The worker claims review took longer. Justice almost always does, once headlines stop feeding it. Some claims reopened, some were barred by time. Some families received compensation. Some received apologies they had not asked for and did not trust. The state found that Vale Dominion had misclassified multiple respiratory illness complaints and delayed vent replacement despite internal warnings. The board removed Conrad permanently from operational control. He kept money, houses, lawyers, and people willing to say he had created jobs. But he lost the company, not legally overnight, not in a dramatic auction. He lost the thing men like him value most, unquestioned command. Every major decision now required monitor approval. Safety spending moved ahead of expansion. Refinancing terms tightened. Government compliance officers walked factory floors without asking Conrad where to stand. Vale Dominion became a company other people could enter with clipboards. That was a kind of downfall money could not spin. One afternoon, Micah visited the factory gate with Elaine. They did not go inside. The investigation was active. They stood across the street near a bus stop where Daniel used to wait after late shifts when the old truck broke down. The furnace building rose behind a chain-link fence, gray walls, high vents, stacks that no longer smoked the same way. Workers came and went through the turnstiles, lunch bags in hand. Elaine watched them. He hated that gate. Why? Said it always looked like it was swallowing men. Micah looked at the vents. Did he ever want to quit? Yes. Why didn't he? Because rent arrives every month, even when courage does not. Micah accepted that. A worker leaving the gate recognized Elaine from the hearing coverage. He crossed the street slowly. "Mrs. Bell?" "Yes. My brother was on line 3. She nodded. "I saw you in court." "Your son, too." Micah braced for gratitude. He did not want it. Gratitude from people still grieving feels like taking change from a broken jar. The man held out a folded paper. "This is my brother's badge copy for the review desk. They said bring records." Micah took it carefully. "Do you want a receipt?" The man blinked. "Yes." Micah pulled a small receipt pad from his backpack. Elaine looked at it and almost smiled. Of course he had one. He wrote the date, name, document description, and chain note. The man held the receipt like it mattered. Because it did. That evening, Micah placed the badge copy in the legal aid intake box and logged it. He clipped the receipt duplicate with the steel crane. The crane was getting worn. Its wing had bent slightly. He straightened it with care. His father had made a fragile thing strong enough for one more file. 6 months after the hearing, Courtroom 12 held a public records integrity workshop. The irony did not escape anyone. The same room where Conrad Snarled now hosted clerks, legal aid interns, archive staff, union representatives, and court technologists. Mara Ellison taught the first section. Leora Chen taught public archive correction. Micah, reluctantly, was asked to speak about chain of custody from the perspective of a non-lawyer participant. He hated the phrase, but accepted the slot. Elaine sat in the back row. Micah stood at the podium with the blue folder. "I was angry," he began. That got the room's attention. "I know people prefer stories where the person with the evidence is calm because he is noble. I was calm because my mother could be hurt, because my father was dead, because a billionaire wanted me to become the disruption he could name instead of the file he could not deny." He opened the folder. "This is the scan receipt. This is the docket gap. This is the correction request. None of them is dramatic. That is why they worked." A legal aid intern asked, "How did you know when to open the file?" Micah touched the steel crane. "My father told me not to open a file until it could protect more than my anger. I waited until the affidavit was signed, the clerk could timestamp the anomaly, and the state could authenticate the file. Waiting did not make the insult smaller. It made the evidence larger." Mara looked down, not ashamed now, remembering. After the workshop, Elaine approached the podium. "You sounded like a lawyer," Micah groaned. "Don't insult me," she laughed. "You sounded like your father pretending not to lecture." "That's better," she touched the crane clip. "Where will you put it when it finally breaks?" "The archive." "Not in a drawer?" "No, in a sleeve." "Good." Later that year, the State Workplace Archive created a display no one had asked for but everyone needed. It was not grand. A simple case near the reading room entrance. Inside lay a copy of File VDM-47B's first page, the public correction notice, Mara's emergency docket form, and Micah's steel crane paperclip holding a blank receipt. Elaine insisted on the blank receipt. "People should know there is always another record coming," she said. The label read VDM-47B, misindexed, recovered, admitted for review. A reminder that a missing number can hold a worker's life. Under it, Micah added his father's line, "Do not open a file until it can protect more than your anger." The archive director asked whether that sounded too poetic. Leora Chen said, "No, it sounds like policy with a pulse." Micah liked that. One rainy morning, nearly a year after the hearing, Micah and Elaine returned to the courthouse to file a statement for the Worker Claims Review. The building smelled the same: wet coats, paper, old wood, burned coffee. The elevator still jerked at the 8th floor. The hallway still made people lower their voices, even when they had done nothing wrong. Outside courtroom 12, they paused. Conrad's case was long gone from the docket board. In its place were landlord disputes, contract motions, custody hearings, debt claims, the daily machinery of people asking the state to witness conflict. Elaine looked at the bench where Micah had stood. "I hated him for calling you that." "I know. I still do. Me too." "Is that wrong?" "No. What do we do with it?" Micah thought about the file, the clip, the workers, the archive, the courtroom, the way anger had not disappeared but had been given a job. "We keep it from driving," he said, "but we let it point." Elaine nodded. "Your father would like that." They walked to the clerk's window. Mara was not there. She had retired the week before. But a new clerk looked up, saw their packet, and asked for the chain form before the filing fee. Micah smiled before he could stop himself. Small repairs are not small to people who know what broke. Outside, the rain had returned in thin silver lines. Micah and Elaine stepped through the courthouse doors and onto the broad stone steps. No reporters waited this time. No cameras, no billionaire, just buses, umbrellas, horns, wet pavement, and a city full of records not yet opened. Elaine took his arm. "You hungry?" "Always." "Your father used to say court makes a person want soup." "Dad said everything makes a person want soup." He was right. They walked down the steps, not through any side exit, not quickly, not as people escaping a room. Behind them, through the courthouse glass, the docket monitor refreshed. VDM-47B admitted for review. Veil Dominion compliance hold active. Micah did not see it update. He did not need to. Some lines matter even when you are no longer standing there to watch them appear. If you were Mara and you saw a Bates range jump while powerful counsel told you to stay in your lane, would you close the exhibit window or keep the scan log? Tell me in the comments. I would keep the scan log. This story is a fictional dramatization about dignity, court records, and why one small file can outweigh a billionaire's snarl when the chain of custody stays intact.